afternoon to all of you. We are in the process of the fourth day of the International Conference of Real Estate Management and Valuation, the last episode of the event. The today's discussion is focused on real estate talk. The real estate talk is an integral part of the conference, aiming at sharing knowledge and building relationship between academia and the industry practitioners. So we have cross-sector panelists will be insisted to hold the discourse around the conference theme, smart real estate towards unmet socio-economic needs. So this real estate talk will be facilitated by a moderator and 7 panelists. First of all, I would like to welcome all the panelists and the moderator to the session, and I will introduce all the panelists and moderator to the session now. First, moderator of the event. Next, Mr. Dilip Mududenia, first panelist of our session. Next, Mr. Christopher Joshua, the second panelist of our session. Next, the third panelist of the session, Mr. Brahmanagir Premala. Next, Mr. Sujiva Rajapaksha. Then Mr. P.W. Senaratna. and Dr. Mrs. Nishani Vikramarajje. And finally, Senior Professor Chair Sampath Amartung. Okay, thank you. And please note that Professor Sampath Amartunga, Dr. Mrs. Nishan Vikramaraj, and Mr. Sujiva Rajapaksa will be joined in between. And I will now hand it over the session to Mr. Dan Gunasekara, moderator of the event.
Thank you, Dr. Kalusantri. Good afternoon and welcome to all the delegates and the panelists of today's session. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be part of your esteemed conference this afternoon. We apologize for the slight delay in the start, but nevertheless, I hope the discussion and discourse would be well worth taking home with you. So, as was introduced just a few moments ago, we've got a group of very eminent panelists, leading members of the private sector and in the industry specialists, and also we are expecting two members of academia to join us in a short while. But when we look at the theme of building or going towards from developing to develop from a real estate market perspective, we need to take stock of our current context. And so I felt it was pertinent that we spend a few minutes setting our sights on where we are right now before we embark on where we want to go. So my first question is to Mr. Premala from the Prime Group. Mr. Premala, would you care to start off the session by building some context around where the real estate is right now in Sri Lanka, particularly over the last 6 to 8 months? I mean, if you take that 6 to 8 months out of the picture, Sri in terms of real estate development from residential to commercial property to with a growing per capita income, all the indicators on the right side of the spectrum. But we had a bit of a hiccup. And then how do you see Sri Lanka placed right now, especially in your line of work? And what could you share with us in a few minutes, if you may? Mr. Prema, you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, we'll see how we all are talking about 6 or 7 months pre-COVID situation with regard to the construction and real estate industry. My expertise mainly in the real estate industry rather than the construction industry, but it goes hand in hand. If you see the before COVID, even before COVID, just before the presidential election, we were having a little bit of problems because at that time it was we had a very good momentum up to 2015, 16, even up to 17, and after that the previous government they were trying to introduce VAT and some other taxes like capital gain taxes and so on. And that has resulted in a very negative sentiment and derail the real construction and real estate industry that was booming at that time. And so the results of that was really felt in 2019. And of course, then what happened after the election of this government, of course, there had been positive policies towards the construction sector. One is that I would say the reduction of interest rates, and now the interest rates have been never before. Now we are now able to get even at 7.58% the interest rate from the banks, which is very good. And the so-called taxes also, that is VAT, and mainly the VAT and even the corporate tax of the construction companies have been reduced. Because of that, the people are having now excess funds and they want to invest some money, their extra money in the safest or safer investment. So that safer investment is, of course, in Sri Lankan any consumer's mind is real estate. So actually, even just after the COVID, even when we open up in May, from June onwards, there had been remarkable improvement in the real estate activities in Sri Lanka, especially the apartments and houses and lands, that sector. What happened was earlier we used to say that our buildings are built on taxes and the bank interest. So the taxes have reduced and the bank interest have reduced, so that it has given some positive momentum to the real estate sector with the beginning of the year. And even after the COVID, because of the reduction of tax, the interest rate, it has the people want to invest one of the safest investments in real estate. So that has been a positive thing up to now. But with the again the coming of the second wave of the COVID, I'm not very sure the momentum whether we could be able to sustain. So that is the position at the moment. Of course, in order to improve the real estate industry and the construction industry, government has to really focus more because any economy or any country, when you go to a particular country, we see we don't really go and see whether the GDP rate and all that look at, but we go to that city and see whether how many tower cranes are working, and how many construction sites are working, how many bridges are being built, and then of course we feel that something is happening in that country. So that momentum that has to come into Sri Lanka, and even to get the foreign FDI, we can take it by way of investment in real estate as well, because a lot of expatriates just after COVID, they really want to come to Sri Lanka. They feel coming to their motherland. So as a result, we see renewed interest in real estate from that aspect as well. The only thing we will have to formulate the policies to capitalize that opportunity and need of the hour, like saying we can give some visas facilities for the investment that is on the card, but still not really come into the effect. Then we can give bank loans for the foreign investors who are investing in real estate. But the entire thing, maybe about 25-30% even given, is good, so that then they feel that they are accepted, and they also rely on the policies of the government. So that way, I would see we can really, like we packaging and giving the tourism sector, we can also have a package and give some package relief to real estate investors outside Sri Lanka. Thereby, we can bring foreign currencies, FDIs, and so on. So there are a lot more to be done, and I hope the relevant authorities will look into that, and then the one-stop the approvals and fast tracking the approvals and all that. And then at the same time, the because of the liquidity or any other problems, there are some projects that have been stalled and that have stopped because of some of the projects. So of course, if we can come forward, then have a sort of package to release them more structured in, so that they can complete their projects, so much the better. So
thank you, Mr. Premalal. So if I was just to summarize, what you said is what we are seeing right now is something that started a few years, maybe 1.5 years ago, with the change of the tax structure. But with the change in government, with the reduction in taxes, with the very positive policies on interest rates coming down, you see an upturn in demand, and you also highlighted some policy issues that we need to correct. Great, we will come back to that later in the program. But if I was to continue from the residential housing to the commercial and retail side of things, I would like to invite Mr. Mugadenian to share his views on how this period of time has been for the commercial space, because sometimes the fundamentals are different. There are a few similarities, but we would like to hear from you. Over to you.
Yes, thank you for inviting me into the valuable discussion. So what I like to bring in two contexts, basically the future of retail, what actually holds for Sri Lanka, and as well as moving forward, current context that we have. So if you look at the current context in the retail spectrum that what we have, Sri Lanka doesn't have so far is what we call most developed retail experience compared to Singapore, India, Malaysia, and some of the Far East Asian countries and South Asian countries. Of course, we have recently built Shangri-La Mall and Colombo City Centre, so on, just been coming up. So from that context, the retail experience that we have is somewhat limited, and it was actually somewhat old and does not conform to the modern day retailing that has emerged, especially on the Far East. If you go to some of these malls that are coming, especially in Thailand and Singapore, you will see the spectrum that they have. So no doubt that all the retailers are actually facing some of the most the difficult challenge that ever faced in the last couple of decades. And obviously the tenants having difficulty in paying the rents because there isn't enough footfall coming in. Of course, the last 3 months was quite encouraging, but again, we have gone into somewhat second wave. So obviously people try to avoid the big shopping malls sometimes. And the second is actually as a result of the economic conditions, people actually not prioritizing their payments, etc. And then of course, some of the footfall creators of the malls like cinemas, etc. not doing well as a result of the current scenario. So taking that in the global scenario in the retail is also the same. So we know that more and more retail shops are being closed completely, and people are actually moving from a different direction. But having said that, the global movement is not necessarily people are looking at in terms of P&L contribution, at least how much of money they make per retail unit. They are basically using this retail and they're bringing different metrics into the place. That is what we call how much of consumer engagement that you can have while having a store. We know that when we advertise online, people actually do what we call something called impressions. So which means that if your name is appeared on screen somewhere for a 1 or 2 seconds, that's called as an impression. So, and then you say that your impression is seen by 500,000 people, 1 million people, and 2 million people. But the duration of that impression is simply 1 second. But if somebody comes to your store and engage with you, and that if that is going to help you to promote or improve your net promoter score, so that the net promoter score means that you know how many people will start promoting your brand, rating your brand on 1 to 10 scale, 9 and 10 above. The rest are not actually promoters. So how much of people will do that? If you look at an outlet like that and start promoting it, then they see a value in that. They see a huge value. So 1 second or 1 or 2 seconds, we pay approximately $1. Then if somebody comes into a store and spending about 2 hours and engaging with your brand, that value is actually $2 multiplied by 60. which is about $130, $140 that will be coming into in terms of return on investment there. So that's what the mechanism which the Victoria's Secrets and some of the retails actually have adopted when they have to close down some of the shops and when they have to continue some. So that's the current landscape that we are coming. So no question of the difficulty that the people are facing. It needs to be completely relooked at it. But moving forward in the future, the question is, will the retail can play a critical role in the whole of economy, and also especially with the tourism industry? The answer is yes. The reason being, people have this what we call omni-channel component. They don't necessarily buy online. They may not necessarily go to a retail shop and buy. They like to see first on retail, maybe buy online, or maybe buy online, go to the retail. Maybe they like to see more experiential element in the shops that the online can't give it. So that's the retail is going through this transformation. The retail industry overall in the world is going through from being a traditional shopping complex into a more experiential shopping or experiential social gatherings, where people can talk about in their social currency, which means the social media impact that they're going to create by visiting these places. So that is the change that is going through. And more brands are actually creating that. And many brands are bringing more experiential elements into the storefront, where the consumers are coming to engage. They bring celebrities at a certain time to meet the people. They have more technology-driven situations where people can come and experience. So it's completely transforming. It's not just actually put your board and have some price tags and selling stuff. So looking at Sri Lankan context, my argument here is that there are 3 points that I like to make here. Is that the overall, the new shopping complexes that are being planned to come in Colombo, the size of that is 1.8 million square feet. 1.8 million square feet. So Shangri-La has already about 500,000. Colombo City Center has about 300,000. Cinnamon Life has about 300,000. Then Havelock City has about 400,000. The ITC about 100,000. Then other 2 or 3 other places already in operation about 200,000, 300, 1.8 million square feet. So what we need now is to create international shopping experience here. Why? If you look at Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, all these 3 countries, they were able to attract large amount of regional tourism, especially from India. Over 1 million tourists goes there. One of the key motivators for them to go to these countries are actually for shopping. Not that India doesn't have, but they prefer the branded shopping, etc., that you see in those countries. So this 1.8 million can be significantly utilized to promote the high-end luxury which you don't have in the country. And then you basically get the tourism to come in, or the Indian tourists to come in, and then start promoting Colombo as a tourism destination, so that immediate benefit will be seen by Colombo as well as the destination. And also there are about 4,000 to 5,000 new rooms are coming in Colombo. So Colombo is not a city which the Europeans and the other countries are willing to visit because they don't see anything interesting in Colombo. But the Indians and the region traffic actually look at Colombo as a more cosmopolitan and a place they like to visit, more clean, etc., compared to those cities, especially India's strategy. So in the case of Sri Lanka's India strategy, bringing Indian tourists, this retail will play a critical role in that. For that, the government will have to look at something which some of these luxury goods who may not necessarily compete with the local goods. For example, a Gucci or a Louis Vuitton shoe will never compete with the shoe manufacturer or a belt manufacturer in Sri Lanka. They are the different price range, different clientele altogether. So we need to bring them, and we need to make sure the tax structures in the country are almost equal, or at least our end price to the consumer is equal into better than Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand. Then what will happen is, if your Gucci or if your Louis Vuitton or if your Prada products are cheaper than Singapore, people will come to Sri Lanka, and then actually it makes sense for them to be in Colombo, go to the shopping complexes and start purchasing it and get some foreign exchange earnings. As a result, what will happen is the shopping destination, shopping tourism in Sri Lanka will grow, and that will go to the other areas as well as spillover will go to the other areas. So I think currently Sri Lanka, because of tax structure, the multiple para-tariffs that we have, like PAL and the cess and etc., your end pricing here is actually about 30 to 40% more on those luxury goods than those countries. So we need to carefully study it. As an association that we created recently, we made the representation to the government and gave a full study, a white paper on this, So we believe that this will be taken into consideration in the coming budget. And if that is the case, and once these things are over, and when these tourists start coming in and people start moving to these malls that are coming up, I think the malls can play a significant role in drawing the foreign exchange earnings to the country, and also to convert as an attraction to the tourists to the country.
Thank you, Mr. Motodenia. So that was a very interesting set of information you shared out there. So a key takeaway that I took from you, apart from the fact that we are in a bit of a rut right now, is that new metrics are in play with regard to real estate investment. And you particularly mentioned about engagement, about providing multi-sensory experiences to shoppers to entice them to enjoy their shopping as opposed to just buying things. And these are new concepts which you said are a little bit dated in Sri Lanka. It's not yet there, but with the new shopping space coming up, 1.8 million square feet, we hope to create this ambience and environment. You also touched on a very critical point, Sri Lanka's India strategy, where actually a lot of Indian tourists do find Colombo to be that much more interesting and cleaner, and they like to live here and a lot of other things. So that kind of offering is a great, great insight. So thank you very much. So since we had the input from the residential and the commercial housing, I would like to then ask Mr. Joshua to share his views on the current context as a builder. Mr. Joshua is the Managing Director of Access Engineering, and with a vast experience stretching across infrastructure, commercial, and some residential work. Would you give us a context on how you read the last 12 to 14 months, and how do you see the industry shaping up?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to be on this panel. Answering your question, basically from a construction perspective, civil engineering perspective, civil engineering as a whole in this country, or for that matter in the developing world, grows at about GDP or a little higher than GDP. Even in a difficult year, last year, where GDP was 2.9%, we had recorded a growth rate. Of course, it was compared to previous years, it was a reduction of about 1%. The construction industry still grew by 6%, making a significant contribution to the GDP. So if the country has to grow, especially a developing country like ours, so the construction industry will definitely grow. So that is the positive side which we see being in the construction industry. Relating it to the real estate construction and of course housing construction, one of the accusations we get in this part of the world is our construction costs are high, relatively high. And that is a fact actually. If you compare with India, we are about 35% higher than India. We are even higher, our construction costs are even higher than Malaysia. And of course, obviously we're cheaper than Singapore. So there are a few reasons for this. To explain this, like Mr. Premalal mentioned, of course, it is the fiscal and monetary policies which are prevalent in this country, the taxing structure, and of course, the levies we have to pay, apart from, of course, the direct cost. So if you take these levies and taxes which are related to the industry, they account to more than 25% of the construction costs. We have done papers and made presentations and showed it. So if these levies and taxes are not there, then we are almost competing with India or somewhere there. Then from the housing perspective, but at one time when this was discussed with the bigger stakeholder in housing development and policy, associated policy is the government. When the government a few years ago initiated a project called the Greater Colombo Social Environment Improvement Project, where they were rehabilitating slum dwellers with affordable housing. So I think that's a part of the housing. Housing is, maybe 3 or 4 components to it. There is affordable housing which you have to give. Then there is middle class housing which is neglected, which I will also speak a little bit for everybody to understand. Maybe there are questions to address. Then of course the commercial real estate, and of course investment, and of course the luxury housing. So from the slum dwellers, or the poor slum dwellers, settlement of South slum dwellers, that project evolved in, from the real estate perspective, it was two-pronged. One thing is, of course, beautifying the city and relocating these slum dwellers, building 65,000 units to relocate 64,000 families. Living in about, it was about, I think, close to 2,000 residents in, I don't know whether people really know this, in 900 acres of prime land in Colombo. These slums are located. So this program was to rehabilitate these slum dwellers with better housing and, of course, liberate this real estate. And you have seen this liberated real estate already in Slave Island and elsewhere in the world. This program was very successful, where this currently up to about 30,000 families have been relocated, and it's ongoing. From a construction perspective, to put you in perspective, the cost, because of these taxes and levies being not charged in such a development, the construction cost is substantially low. So these units cost the government, which is, the livable units within the, built again within the Colombo city with lifts and, medium rise. Each unit cost the government between 5 million to 7 million. But they're liberating, of course, a much more valuable commercial property. Then, of course, that has been addressed. And then, of course, you come to the government servants' housing, where since building the Manning flats in Sri Lanka, maybe about 25 years ago, there have been no real development towards affordable housing for government servants. Again, I think the government about 6 years ago realized this, and they started building middle class housing for government servants. And one of the first project which was completed and handed over, we had a hand in constructing in that was overlooking, it's called Oval Vistas, where 606 units were completed and handed over to government servants. There again, the government servants were able to buy housing there at affordable prices because the land value was not considered. And so the units were ranging, a 2-bedroom unit with about maybe 800 square feet was ranging from about 9 million rupees to a 3-bedroom unit for 12 million rupees. So here again, I want to share with you, because there are people in the private sector involved in this forum. We initiated something called a PPP model for this, where the government only gave the land. They couldn't afford to come up and put up the money for construction. And but of course, because of the you all know that, and the price proposition of the finished product and the quality of the finished product, we realized that it can, the demand here for that type of housing, where, so we said, okay, we will build this at our cost, but so that we draw our money off this escrow account. When the went out, they're saying that we are building housing units, there were 4,000 applicants. So they had to draw lottery, basically draw lots to allocate this. To be honest, this is the best paying project ever for us in the private sector or in the public sector, because these people are well on time, paying well on time, and occupy. Another one like that, they started just in Kotaro, which was just kicked off. The government has a big bank of real estate in that sense. And if they want to give affordable housing, especially to the middle class, they have a role to play here. So that type of scheme is now thought of, and the government is looking at finding similar scheme where the middle, it becomes, due to urbanization, people moving to the city, and of course congestion, and people like to live close to the city, coming up with similar models, and our program is in place. I think you will see substantial amount of housing being built. So that is that part of it. The other circle is, of course, the luxury segment, and of course the upper middle class segment. We have been involved in 2 developments. Of course, one a major development, we have been building about 1,300 apartment units. Now that offtake also is very good. I mean, because of the pricing and affordability. Then from an investment perspective, another thing which has to be considered is, of course, the future of because we are talking about living in the Western province, and of course the biggest growth rate still, contributes more than 45% of the GDP is from the Western province. And the growth rate is also here. And the biggest, from a real estate perspective, the biggest growth prospect you see is in the port city, nowhere else. I mean, already we know there are built up areas of 1.4 million square meters of retail space, but the port city alone will have 1.2 million square meters. It's more than 10 times that. So that is the future. And I think, of course, the investors will make every possible, lobby, avenue, or opportunity to make it happen. And from a real estate perspective, that's going to basically change the landscape of the Western province. So that is that. So from a construction perspective, with these investments, of course, the fiscal and monetary policies have to be in place to support these initiatives so that you can take it forward. We are not in this world alone. Entire world is competing for these investments, especially in mega projects like that. So we have to make it attractive so people visit us and still consider us as a good investment prospect. As the previous speakers said before me, that Colombo is still considered a viable, livable city, especially in Southeast Asia. We are considered to be still the best city. So that is the leverage we have on this. But of course, the fiscal and monetary policies have to be in place to make sure that we drive that advantage and get the real investments in.
Thank you, Mr. Joshua. So the highlight of what you were saying was more around the favorable government policies and initiatives, the landmark projects where you partnered with the government to build housing, to liberate some prime real estate in Colombo, and how this is working very well. So given that the construction industry outpaces GDP, we will be looking towards this industry to really be the engine of growth as we motor along, hopefully away from COVID times. So I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Sri Jayewardenepura, who joined us a short while ago. And before I move on to the other panelists, I would like to quickly get some views from Mr. Rajapaksa. Mr. Rajapaksa, good afternoon. Are you able to hear us?
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So the panelists before you, Mr. Joshua from Access Engineering, Mr. Mudadinia from John Keels, and Mr. Premala from Prime Group, both took time to explain their current industry context, mixed bag of views, but they point to some landmark issues and policies, the change in the tax structure favorably over the turn of this year, certain government policies that are working in their favor, and certain strategies Sri Lanka needs to have as a country in building a tourism and retail hub. So my question to you, Mr. Rajapaksa, is how is the economy placed to take advantage of these situations, these opportunities in real estate? As a country, in your role as chairman of People's Bank, you would have a view on how the depositing, lending mechanisms are working in this country. And in terms of building a real estate hub, how ready are we, especially in the current context?
Dan, let me first thank you for inviting me, but unfortunately, yes, I got a little late, but I was able to, fortunate enough to listen to Mr. Mudandenia and Joshua both. And of course, they both gave fantastic, the views of the industry as a whole. In the meantime, I'm sure, the Premalal would have given the similar kind of comments, although I could not join when he was making the presentation. Looking at from let me talk about the banking industry, or especially People's Bank. And what I, as a whole, I can tell you, the confidence of the customers is very important, because even we do have quite a few bad investments probably we have made, or maybe due to obvious reasons. What I have to say is, as a result of kind of, relatively weak financial management. In some of these companies, the poor customers are now in little difficulties. Not little, sometimes they are in real difficulties because they are unable to get their the apartments on time. As a result, there's huge issue about the confidence. As a result, the bankers are, or rather, especially I can tell you from my own bank, People's Bank. We have quite large number of NPLs from the industry. I think this may not be something good, something we expect. Really looking at, or rather analyzing the whole issue, I have seen, of course, being not being a typical banker, but being a financial guy, because that you take your funds or you borrow funds and then you utilize for some other projects. Having having so many projects at a time without having a proper capacity in you or your group has become, I think, has led to this kind of issues. Joshua and I think Dandenia plus probably maybe Premlal also would have spoken about this. Affordability is important, but when it comes for difficult or the mismanagement of funds, then it will be very, very difficult for them to have a kind of affordability in this. Even a couple of I happen to take part in some of the discussions taking place at the or rather with the president, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa. They are also, I think, Joshua I think pointed out that cost structure or the cost is about 35% more than the other. So why? Where does it? I think government has given the maximum kind of in fairness to the government has given kind of concessions and things like that. Even cement, sometimes people say that, okay, it's expensive here for some reason, which should not be the case. If you want to, as Joshua said, if you want to see that, okay, the Colombo is the best town or in Southeast Asia, I think we have to seriously look at that. I don't know whether it happens, and it's I mean, strange to see that when there are 900 odd acres in the Colombo, occupied by this or other slums, there's a huge opportunity. Now he was also talking about, I'm talking about not only as a chairman of the bank, also the managing partner of my own firm, BDO Partners, where we have now. You won't believe, there's a famous flats called Torrington Flats. There are about 890 purchase. Now, BDO, my firm, has now partnered with the House Owners Association, and now one of these days, within a week or two, we are going to float a RFP for developers to come and take over the development of that entire area. So there are a lot of opportunities, and he was talking about government servants. Now we also have had some kind of understanding with government SLS officers association to develop another fairly large extent of land in Palavatta. This is where, because now they expect professionals to come and undertake this for their own benefits. And bankers are there to support for this kind of initiatives, I think, because this is very important. Another important thing is now, if you take Bumblepedia Flats, because through my experience, I'm telling you now, Bumblepedia Flats development have been handed over to another company where they have, I think, failed to perform. Then what happened? There's an issue about this, because one thing, that land is neglected, the other thing is expected development is not taking place, and the bankers have given financial facilities. So this confidence is not there. I think since there are two main developers here in this, I don't know whether there are others. It's better, I think, for you all to get involved and probably maybe undertake some of this kind of development which are available for the benefit of the economy. You are asking me about the government policies. I think I know there are certain things that I think I'm sure that we also have recommended or put forward, like Mudandini said. For the the budget, I'm sure that government will seriously look at developing or rather coming out with some kind of relaxation in some of the policies, especially about the taxes and things like that. through this the coming budget. So I think that's what I can tell you initially. I hope that I would have given you that.
Thank you, Mr. Azabaksa, for your views. So a hallmark of what you mentioned was that some of the real estate developers who have done well are doing fine, but then there are those who have not done their due, and those assets are causing some stresses to the bank. And we will come back to that point in a short while. But I would like to bring in Mr. Senaratna, who is a former chief government valuer, because there were a few points that were discussed earlier by the panelists, which I felt were interesting from a valuation perspective. Mr. Mududenia spoke about building customer engagement, looking at creating impression, looking at engaging a shopper in a way that traditional shopping models didn't earlier. Then Mr. Joshua spoke about looking at liberating some prime land, so basically alternative users of land and the valuation thereof. And also Mr. Azapaksa spoke of how they have partnered with residents to develop areas, that would be of value. Now, could we get a view from you as to how these new trends in how we look at real estate, how does that dovetail back into the way valuations are done? Because to the developers, to the borrowers or the investors, often this is a place which is a bit of gray area. So the question specifically is, how do we, from a valuation perspective, we are speaking to a large body of valuers here, how do we use our knowledge and adapt to new ways in which valuations are done, and how do we understand?
Good afternoon to everybody. At the same time, thank you, Dayan, for inviting me to participate in this discussion. In fact, before talking on how this valuation behaves in the present context of market, I must little talk on what we are doing as professionals. Really speaking, when we talk on the process of valuation, valuation is a process of finding the present value of a future income stream of interest in a property based on the past information. That's the normal definition we use. When I break that into several parts, what is the process of finding the present value? For each and every property, we know that properties are generating income and the yields. For example, if we take residential and commercial properties, they generate rentals. And if we take some agricultural properties, they generate, their yield is there, then they coconut or anything, tea or rubber, anything, the yield is there, they generate income. Likewise, every and each property, generally we categorize everything into 4: commercial, residential, industrial, and agricultural. Whatever the categorization is, every and each property is generating an income. Our prime work is, the valuer's job is to determine the future income what will be generated by them. And for in that context, it's very important for us to think of the generally how we do it. To do that, of course, we have to collect the past information. Past information means the data available in the open market. And that definition say something else also mentioned, the future income stream of an interest in the property. That's very important, because generally we consider the interest of that particular property. It means the ownership. Generally, the freehold interest is the supreme, and leasehold interests are there. You may find that in the development strategy, most of the lands in Colombo are owned by the Urban Development Authority, and they give them on 99-year leases, long-term leases, and 50-year leases, so 30-year leases. And likewise, valuers, our job is to, first of all, find the ownership, then based on that ownership, do the valuation. And for that, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the fast information is very important. Fast information means the information available in the open market. Now, I listened to the eminent property developers in Colombo, especially Western province, Mr. Premalal, Mr. Mudulige, Mr. Joshua, and also the financial aspects mentioned by the Honorable Chairman of the People's Bank. So what I gathered is, of course, we had some blurred picture about the current market situation in the country. But after their talks, of course, I thought the picture is not that blurred. Something is visible and little clear picture we have. But as valuers, of course, what we face is when we are going to do a valuation, we have to based on the market data. Then the market data, if we take this 2019 and 2020, is little, it's very rather difficult for us to find market data. Why? Because of the 2019 April attack. Then after that, of course, this year, the COVID-19, we generally experience a stagnated type of market at the moment when you take the whole country into account. Even in Colombo, I see most of the these condominium properties, because especially the condominium high-rise buildings, the demands from most of the investors, really speaking, they buy property for investment purpose to earn some return on that. The money is spent, not for their own occupation. Because generally they advertise them in online websites, and they get rentals from most of them, of course, from foreigners. And likewise, that market, of course, it will hit. But even though the general market in the country is not that bad, but little stagnated type of market which was prevailed at the end of 2019, we experienced. But at the same time, when we go to outside from Colombo, Western province, still the gradual increase we can see in the open market. Even in Colombo properties, for small land developer, of course, then prime lands and others are there. They will evidence for that. I think still the land market has not come down. It's gradually increasing. I generally analyzed the reasons for this, because we are undergoing a pandemic situation, COVID pandemic from March of this year. But when I analyzed, really, when I went back to about 1970s, the 1970s, we had this economic crisis of collapsing of security exchange in UK and US. And that was there in 1972. And also the OPEC embargo, the embargo went on Canada first and then the Japan. And by that economic crisis, that was affected to the whole world. But when we take our country, 1970 to 77, of course, we had a general stagnated type of market. That is mainly because of the legislation introduced by the then government. What happened was, they introduced this land reform law, then the Rent Act number 7 of 1972, and also the ceiling on property law, lot of restrictions on properties. Therefore, because of that, we had some stagnated type of market, but the economic crisis of the world did not affect to our country. The economic crisis affected to England and UK. For both countries, they went up to 1985 and 87 respectively. And after the government came into in 1977, that is when they declared this free economy in this country, our property market was gradually increasing, and of course the prices went up, skyrocketed really. And even that increase of prices. And even I experienced even up to 2019. We did not, even the crisis in 2002, this the SARS crisis, which was affected severely to Singapore market, did not affect us. And even 2009, the American, this collapse of American market, that also did not much affected. Our prices, our gradual prices were going on. That was the experience as a value of mine. And also, and when we go back to 1977, they introduced various legislations to stop that the increase of prices being going to the property owners. For example, I can say the UDA, Urban Development Authority Law number 41 of 1978. By introducing that, they introduced a different system of paying compensation rather than in the procedure given in the Land Acquisition Act. They took the market. Generally, what we do is we go by the Section 78 under Land Acquisition Act and do the valuation. But under the UDA law and NHDA, UDA, GCC law, and all those laws, they curtail, they stop paying the increase of prices to property owners by introducing various legislations. And of course, it's limited for a limited period. After say for about 5 years or so, after that, it has come to normal situation. And those are the things, of course, I can say about the property market. And as valuers, what we do is we are supposed to follow the general principles of valuation. Of course, the market value also there's another definition. If I come out of that, of course, the market value means estimated amount of money for which an interest in the property ought to exchange on the date of valuation between a willing seller and willing buyer in an arm's length transaction after proper marketing, wherein the parties had each acted with full knowledge, prudently, and without compulsion. Of course, it's also discussed about the ownership of the property. And clearly, if I say clearly, we don't value land and buildings, we value the interest or the ownership in the property. And that is the one we can hand over or transfer to another person. That's the normal thing, of course, everybody knows. Then when we talk on this the further, then the estimation of this market value, and you may see that now this Shangri-La development is there, and also the Port City is there, Port City development project is there, and so many projects in Colombo likewise there, because the Shangri-La property, as you know, it was the former army playground. And when the government asked to fix a price for that, in 2011, really 2010 or so, the comparison we found, as I said, we go on the market data, the comparison we found for 3 or 4 purchases of land in Main Street went up to about 10 million per purchase at that time. That's the maximum we found. That the actual prices, not the prices declared in title deeds. Of course, as all of us know, deeds are mostly understated. And for that, of course, we had to find some scenario, some way of doing valuation. And to tell you, of course, the price we determined or placed at that time is about about 15 or 20 acres extent of acres. And the price we fixed was about 9.5 million per purchase. As you know, when the extent goes up, the price comes down, and the extent comes down, then the prices all goes up. That's the normal condition we expect in the open market. But even though at that time, although the value of 10 purchase was there in Main Street of Colombo Fort, we were able to adopt about 9.5 million per 6-acre land, 6-acre plots of lands in that particular location. And you may ask why, how you do that valuation, such evaluation. Of course, you have the methods called residual basis of valuation on the development scenario. What we do is generally we decide what the maximum development we could do in such a land. And of course, after deciding that, we calculate back and arrive at the land value later on. That's the normal situation. Now, I think I little explain what really valuers are doing in the market like this. And I explain generally the market trends in the open market at the moment. And as valuers, even for banks and other financial institutions, we do valuations. And of course, generally what we do is we little concerned about the present market conditions, but locally, we don't see any falling of prices. Still, a stagnated type of market is there, but little increases are there as evidenced by the land registry. Because I was able to gather some data from land registry. All these transactions are taking place like 2019, even 2020. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Ratna. So I picked up two valuable points from your explanation, which I'll come back to in a short while. One is the availability of information. You spoke about comparables and the availability of information, and also possibly some gaps in our legal framework that will play a role in valuation when you look at today's context going forward. So we will come back to that point. So I would like to take the panel through a common thread that all of you expressed earlier, which is on the aspect of policy. So when we kicked off the session, Mr. Premanar mentioned about the change of the fiscal policy, especially in 2018, and then again at the end of 2019, how it in one way constricted and then released, created some interest in the market. So I sort of will split this problem into 4 segments. So if I would ask Mr. Premanar to give us his view on how the taxes on, the policy on taxation and also ownership affected the housing market that Prime Group directly interacts with, and what was the dynamics it created because of these changes. And leading from that, we'll move on to Mr. Joshua and Mr. Muldenia, but I would like to listen to Mr. Premanar first. Mr. Premanar, you're on mute. Mr. Premanar, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. Now we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Right. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there had been a real boom in especially the apartment market, especially in 2014, 15, 16, and that era. And a lot of apartments have come into the market. So with that, of course, the previous government, they were talking of implementing VAT and the capital gain tax and the other port levy charges and so on. As a result of that, they have really, the irony is that they have not really implemented that tax. The talk of the tax, especially VAT, had really created the uncertainty in the market and so on, and the momentum was starting from to go down from year 2018 live. So actually, they have implemented that VAT in 2019 November, and in 2019 December, the present government changed it, but the effect was there. As I said earlier, most of as Mr. Joshua also said, most of our cost of construction here is mainly due to this tax structure and the bank interest rates. So if we can reduce that, actually now it has been reduced, we will be able to compete with the market, as well as even the people will be able to afford an apartment or a house. So that was the main thing. In addition to that, of course, we on the approval process, and then even to arrange banking loan facilities for foreigners to come and so on. The visa are really vital for the industry. When it comes to Mr. Sujiva Rajapaksa, what I said, I must tell that for the purpose of the viewers and the general public, what happened was, even I was telling at that time, but I was talking about the competition, so people would have not taken it seriously. What happened, because of the increase in demand and the opportunity in the marketplace, the lot of people who are not really real estate or construction people came into the market. And as a result, anybody could come into this market. If you have a 40 purchase or 30 purchase or 20 purchase, and even if you do not have 20 or 30 purchase, still you can have an agreement with somebody else, and then have architect, and then nice, very beautiful 3D work can be done, and the advertisement, and he can become a real estate developer. So that's what has happened. And the people, the lot of developers who can afford to have 2 or 3 projects have went up, and they were starting many multiple projects, which their financial they are not capable to have a serious real estate development project. Of course, you need to have a good capital financial strength, the technical strength, market strength, and all that has to be there. So without that, a lot of people have come into this market, and then of course that's why you see a lot of projects that has been stopped, and that has become a burden for the most of the banks, including People's Bank. That is where the whole thing has come into a sort of a standstill at the moment, because bank has burned their fingers, and the people who have invested, the customers have burned their fingers. So what the customer was looking at, and most of the people, when they come to a apartment or a house, they looked at what? They looked at the price automatically, the location, definitely, the place, price, then the design, then they look at even who the architect is, and even they look at the constructor as well. But they have failed to look at very vital element in this process. They have been looking at the development, and even the payment structure, discounts, everything they will look at. But they fail to look at the developer. So that is also a very important, because that is where your hard-earned money is going to invest, and they have forget about that. So developer also have to be looked into. So his capacity, his previous records, and so on. Now, for example, if we have launched about 44 apartment complexes, and we have delivered about 36 apartments projects. So like that, of course, the capability have to be looked into. People have failed to look at, and they have lost a lot of money in the process. So in order to avoid that, of course, now SIDA also trying to do that, some sort of a ranking has to be there. So we, in our case, Prime Group, we sort of self-regulated. We on our own went and got a credit rating. Of course, by a stable credit rating, we are the first real estate company to get a credit rating. So people, of course, overall, since after the COVID, there had been overall market, maybe sometime reduction in the other areas, but people now come to a non-trusted brands, like we are there, then the Yonki is there, then the Access there, like that non-trusted branded people, because they don't want to lose their money. And so that is another type of equation. Now, even the bank, when they really look at lending, they will have to really look at the past records and so on, because at one point, if the project is going to be stopped, the bank is in trouble, and at the same time, the investors or the customers are also in trouble. So they are, of course, then I think the government or CDAO have to have some mechanism when they approve. Of course, they are working on that ranking and sort of some rating for the construction or a particular development. So that also has to come into the to long-term sustainability of the industry. So that is, I feel, very vital in the present context, to see that there should be there to have a smooth functioning of the construction and the real estate industry. And of course, land prices, as our professor mentioned, is not, of course, Colombo prices might be a little bit stagnant, but other prices may not be, because we are an island and the demand for land is in eternally is in increase. So it doesn't get reduced. And even at the same time, our landowners are also, they don't want to just part with their property without any good cause, and without they really want their land prices, otherwise they will not really part with their land for any development, or even if they do not get a correct price. So in that case, always my personal experience, that they are always asking the higher prices. That's why always you see the land prices are going up.
Mr. Premalal?
It is basically the landowners are always increasing the price, and that price will be reflected ultimately in the final price.
Mr. Premalal, if I was to ask you a follow-up question.
That's
yeah.
That's a
yes.
Hello.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Premalal, I think you broke up a little bit. But if I was to ask you a follow-up question, about documentation, and we often hear about the ease of doing business, but are you satisfied as a developer on the ease of ownership in today's context of land laws and the Sri Lankan regulation? Because as Mr. Serath also pointed out, increasingly people are investing in real estate as an investment. And when you make an investment, you are worried about the developer, you're also worried about the legal framework, you're worried about so many things. Are you satisfied that the legal framework is both secure on the one hand and also easy to manage on the other to attract investment into this sector?
Yeah, basically, from the developer's perspective, of course, not really satisfied when it comes to the getting the approvals. That's a long process, and then we'll have to it goes with so many delays and so on. Now, for example, I'll tell you once after the approval getting and after all the other has been done, and once the building is completed, still we will have to sometimes stay for more than 5-6 months to get the final deed is getting registered. Now, for example, to get the COC, certificate of conformity, then of course we'll have to go to the local authority. They say they are meeting in once a month, and then particular day they say their technical officer, UD officer, somebody has not come. Then it goes on to the next month, and like that, then there are at least 2-3 months will be at the local council level, or sometimes 3-4 months. And then for a slighter thing, then again they want to reverse it and go to the same process. And once we get that, then we will have to do the deed of declaration, and then again go to the land registry, and to register about 70 or 100 units. to do that, also land registry might take at least 2-3 months. So to finally, after building the building, also to get the final deed to be done and get the at the time of transfer only, the most of the people are paying their most of the part of the valuation. That also may take 6 months. Just imagine. So there had been always is a bottleneck at the local level, and then we will have to really undergo. This is a sector that gives so much to the economy. Now, for example, take our prime grant at Ward Place. That's about 300 units and about over 30 billion project, 32 billion. So once we finish and transfer those to the respective people, the government will get stamp fee alone 1.2 billion. Likewise, we calculated the John Keys, their project may be giving more than 1.5 to close to 2 billion stamp fees alone. But they don't take that take us that serious. That is stamp fees alone. So when we purchase the land, also we have paid. When we purchase a workplace, we paid over 120 million as a stamp fees. Then other than the taxation, other than the whatever the other taxation. So that is where that we cannot understand how a project is contributing towards the economy, but still we are at a sort of a stepmotherly treatment in everywhere. Yeah, that I think the personal experience, this would have happened to definitely for the other developers as well. And to see that it's taking a very long time. I forgot to tell you, after the COC, we will have to go to the CMA, that is Condominium Management Authority, for again the approval. That process also takes another 2 months. And then after that only it goes to the land registry. So it's once you finish your project, still another 6 months will be going after that also. And the same thing happened before the process also, once we purchase the and then for the preliminary approvals. So actually, it's very sad to say that ease of business is not easy here.
Thank you, Mr. Premalar. So on that same note, I would like to move to Mr. Joshua, who is with us. Mr. Joshua, you mentioned about the cost of construction. That is something that I also did some reading out before I came in, and you touched the number of 30%. As well as you mentioned of paratariffs and its impact. Now, if I was to sidestep, one of the reasons paratariffs are brought in are to, safeguard the local industry. But what I understood from you is that, when you are 30% more expensive than your regional peers, then you immediately as a country become uncompetitive. And that is counterproductive with the broader picture. So how much needs to get done to make this cheaper? Because in the media, we read that there are foreign construction companies who are able to pitch at 20-30% lower than the local companies. And there's this dialogue going between the government and the industry and how we can improve this balance. So towards specifically addressing the tariffs, how much can be done? And do you believe that by removing these paratariffs, that the local players will be badly off, or will they still gain with the overall growth of the industry?
Yes. From the tariff perspective, of course, contribution of tariff towards construction cost, of course, that is coming from government's fiscal policies. One is the direct construction or directly related costs, like what Mr. Premaral mentioned, the VAT. VAT is directly add-on cost, but that is abolished for certain housing years, for condominium property years. For anything else, no, it is still on. So there is already the VAT coming in. So that is a direct add-on, which is directly paid to the government. So you have to take that out straight away out of this 30%. Then, of course, the corporate tax, the corporate tax, which was, if you want to, for the construction industry to bring down costs, then of course there must be some thought to the corporate tax. And now it has been reverted back to a to a preferential tax, the corporate tax, but previously it was ad hocly increased by 300%. So, I mean, okay, every industry, especially in the private sector, we do projects, and the primary drivers of our business is also to make some profit too, So that corporate tax effect. Then, of course, the withholding taxes, various withholding taxes. There was a point where the government had a policy where 5% withholding tax had to be paid. So when you have a 5% withholding tax, especially in a maybe unregulated construction environment where some especially subcontractors and labor suppliers are not really regulated, if you tell them that I have to keep 5% withholding tax from his payment, he says, sir, please add it on to my cost. I'm not going to, it's not going to make me, no point you withholding and giving me 5%. That's not going to give me any. Anyway, I'm not paying tax. Directly add on tax. So those are the fiscal side which are now getting corrected. I must tell you, they are getting corrected. Now little sanity is in place, and they are getting corrected, and they are giving it some thought. And some correction measures have already been implemented, and now it's legislated also. The other cost is material cost, direct material cost. That also comes in form of scarcity. Obviously, you know economies, especially sand. We'll say sand. Sand is basically a scarce commodity here because of environmental concerns. Sand is transported. Most of the sand to the Western province, if it's river sand, it's transported more than 150 or 200 kilometers away from. So you add the transport cost. It's a very simple thing. And on the way, these people who pass through different provinces and checkpoints have to pay official and unofficial payments. That's also added on to the cost. So that's also part of the cost chain, which is beyond the control of the contractor, of course. But this is then also another funny thing is, with this provincial council decentralized tariff system, if you mine in one province, say you borrow earth in one province and take it to the other province, you pay taxes in both provinces. So regulation has to be in place. We understand the revenue of provinces is, province is maybe resources of that area also part of their revenue. But if you are taking it within one country and building, the same people have housing for the same people of the country, and if you have to pay, taxes or royalties in two provinces for the same product, so this also adds up. So these are the things which can be looked and addressed, and of course eliminated. Then of course Mr. Premalal spoke from an approval perspective. That again, if you talk about the approval process, getting, if you start starting from scratch, still it takes more than 1 year to get a building approval, more than a year. And so that delay from maybe you're venturing into a project, every delay is cost, it's overheads. When you understand, so that's also built into, finally is being built into at least pre-operational cost, or whatever is associated with, because still about 18 agencies have to approve, give all these approvals. Then of course, I've just since we are on the topic and Mr. Senaratna spoke about valuation. Of course, he explained the principles of valuation adapted. But one thing which is not clear is the valuation is not based on the use of the property here. Maybe you have historical, but future use of the property is not considered. I don't know why. For example, we have a property next to Access Towers, which is only allowed to do a car parking, but you can build and you can have a revenue, only do a multi-story car parking where you can maybe park 500 vehicles, but the land value is same as the normal commercial price at Union Place. But the restriction in development is not considered in the valuation. I don't know why. I have failed to understand that. So when the UDA calls for tender, they will put valuer's value. This is the government valuer's value, which is the normal land price. So no offers, because no developer can deliver a commercially viable car park based on that valuation. So that is something which has to be considered if you have to progressively value land based on its usage. Now the government's initiative to give affordable housing, which they are now launching, and Mr. Rajapaksa also, as he mentioned, already I think initiative is taken to build close to maybe 12,000 housing units, 12,000 affordable multi-story housing units within Colombo city and suburbs. Here, the government is, because the government is initiating the projects, then they do purpose valuation for the land, because they want to put it in the affordable bracket. But if the private sector, like Mr. Premaral said, wants to buy a land from the UDA and develop it, the valuation is different. If the private sector is encouraged, like you must build middle-class housing in this vicinity, so then you must provide a private valuation based on the affordability of the buyer. What is the price this is going to be sold at? Of course, the land use and the land utility. So that is something I think as a policymaker you have to address. But since this forum you are looking at, you lobbying with the relevant authorities towards policy change also. Another thing I have to highlight is, apart from Mr. Premaral's explanation about the approval process being so widening, something I fail to understand is that certain developers, of course, you need responsible developers, grading developers, because the developers have got a bad reputation because of these irresponsible developers, and of course the banks also have suffered due to this action of these irresponsible developers. So irresponsible developers are also created by irresponsible buyers also. Because if you're buying a land, you will do every research to the land, the property, the title deed. If there is one folio even missing, you won't buy that land. But when you go buy and buy a condominium with that same amount of money, you don't even research the developer. So that is something which I sometimes fail to understand. And you invest your hard-earned money with a maybe fly-by-night developer who has suddenly propped up and done some fancy advertising, but has no substance to support his claims. So that is something I think people, also the buyers, have to think of. And then of course, if you're grading developers, in another competition, the genuine reliable developers face, especially the small-time developers who are doing small units in 40-50 purchases, that getting development approvals. So approvals are based on, of course, road frontages and buildability and FARs and the normal regulations, which and approach roads and all that infrastructure, traffic studies, all that is fine. But a genuine developer will have to will comply with all that before he starts his development. But if a not so reputed developer develops say condominium, violating his development approval, say that he's allowed to build 3 floors and he builds 5 floors, and the penalty for him is and when he goes for maybe final COC approval, he'll put a revised plan, and there is only a penalty which he has to pay for the violation. So basically, he's encouraged to violate because he's making more money, deviating from the plan. So then you can't compete in level playing field. So the human factor, you shouldn't leave this to the human factor. I think if there's policies in place, if there's rules in place, everybody must follow rules. I mean, if they have broken the rules, then the repercussion is they should be able to be told to break down the building. So we have hardly seen such instructions. So therefore, this unapproved development with subsequent approvals are happening, and that is hampering the industry too. So there's another area which is of concern definitely for everybody, every responsible developer. We don't want to, they will never go down that path, but that is the unfair and very, very irrational and illogical competition the genuine developers are facing too.
Sorry, Mr. Joshua, I didn't know you missed this, but one of the reasons that they impose is to protect the domestic industry of those products, especially on import tariffs. Do you believe that removal of these tariffs will cause an injustice to these local companies, or do you feel that the growth of the industry will provide both them as well as your imported supplies to both make money without having much damage? Because the tariffs alone will add on to the cost, making the overall product uncompetitive.
Yes, so basically, of course, if you want to protect the local industry should be able to deliver what the customer wants. Finally, the buyer only is making these decisions here. So basically, certain products and services are available locally up to the mark, and I don't think anybody is importing it. If you take, for example, we'll say a condominium project, I'll put it in perspective so that people will understand. The imported components, if it's upper middle class condominium, the imported component will be a maximum of 30% of the project cost. So it's not a huge component here. It's not a massive component. That is on the high side. So it will be vary between 20%. So from the total project cost of that condominium project, 20% will be imported items. So if the local quality is available and standard is available to deliver that, yes, certainly, why not take it from local industry? Otherwise, if it's not available, why do you compromise a finished product with only this limited imports? And why do you put a higher tariff on that? Obviously, then the end user will end up paying a higher tariff on that. So the people have to rationalize without generalizing and look at this. And of course, on the other hand, of course, some protection or some encouragement must be given to the local industry to improve, otherwise they won't improve. When somebody spoke about, of course, it's a free trade. If it's free trade and economies of scale, and you buy from the cheapest source, and that is how free trade works, and efficiency and at cheapest price, best product, and you use it. But unfortunately, certain countries who are exporting to us will not have the same barriers to run the industries as in our country. So then finally, they said then total free trade also doesn't work. So we have to be sensible about it. Some protection has to be there. Yes, I agree. Encourage it, but give them objectively that they have to lift standards, come up to this level. Otherwise, in the interim, since it's not a huge, significant impact, it will be developed, allowed so that the standards will increase.
Thank you, Mr. Joshua. So at this point, I would like to welcome to the panel our Senior Professor Chair, Professor Sampath Amatunga. He was otherwise occupied in his official duties, so he was unable to join us earlier. Good afternoon and welcome, Professor Amatunga, to this panel. Good afternoon. So I would like to, I'm sure you were listening to the discourse that we had a few minutes ago, and what Mr. Premalal and Mr. Joshua were highlighting are some of the practical difficulties they have as real estate developers in Sri Lanka. Now, my question to you is, through the Department of Estate Management and Valuation, through the other related agencies, professional bodies, there are heaps of professionals and academics who are interacting with these industries every day. So they see practically the obstacles that they face on the one side, and also they have the solutions in mind. Now, what we need is a good happy marriage between the latest developments and the policies coming into play. So the question to you, sir, is what role can academia play in studying these trends and really pushing the policymaker to make these changes? Because overall, what is required is the development of the industry. I would like to know your views on that.
Yes, thank you so much. And I know that a lot of friends are listening today. I was listening to Mr. Premalal's wonderful presentation, and Mr. Joshua's wonderful presentation as well. I would like to say, when it is come to land, it is not the resource as a land that only the surface that you can see. Anything you build on land is also coming under the concept of land in economics. Not only that, even the below, I mean minerals, whatever, also again comes under land. So land plays a vital role in economics. So there are 4 factors of production. So number 1 is land. Then you get labor and capital and entrepreneurship. So if you keep aside entrepreneurship, if you take only land, capital and labor, so land has a greater shortage. That is the uniqueness. And when it is come to labor, there are so many substitutes, robots, so many things. You can improve time to time labor. You can improve the productivity. You can increase the efficiency. But when it is come to land, it is totally different. it is a unique. So by listening to both two speakers before me, I would like to say, actually, in a liberal economy like Sri Lanka, because we have opened the economy in 1977, actually in November, and we have a floating exchange rate, and prices most of the time determined according to the demand and supply. When it is come to price, not only prices of goods and services, even prices of labor and the savings and interest markets, that is interest rates, and this is all determined according to the demand and supply. But anyway, just looking at the two presentations, that is unbelievable how entrepreneurs survive in this country, those who are work with this land and building industry. I cannot imagine the process which the owner of Prime Land explained, and the stamp duty, of course, okay, paying any taxes to the government, but the time consuming process in Sri Lanka, going here and there, and also the other spokesman also explained. So the role of academia is to take all these ideas up to the policy making level and educate policy makers in order to have a friendly atmosphere in business. So I think this is what our comparer wanted me to explain. So first of all, let me thank Department of Estate Management and Valuation, considering a timely, important seminar like this in a public forum level, and University of Sri Jayewardenepura and Faculty of Management Studies and Commerce. So I would say we are in a bottleneck today. And we have a lot of entrepreneurs who have become international standards, and we have a lot of businessmen. Our community is now very, very advanced, and also the government help to business also in a very high capacity, considering the rate of interest and all. But still, the land law of this country is not favorable for business. And not only the land law, even though this is not relevant to today's this conference, even the labor law is not friendly for business. If you compare the law in Singapore related to labor, it is totally different. Here we cannot fire a worker, not only in public sector, even in the private sector, you can't say no to anybody. A lot of unions are, powerfully working, and like that. So it's very difficult when it is come to development. So we are now in a middle level income category, but also in a middle level, we are in the upper layer of the middle income. So we cannot have huge foreign grants, because we are not that poor to have such grant elements in our loan schemes as well. So we have to develop on our own. But the biggest problem is the gap between domestic savings and the desired investment ratio that actually we want to maintain. So when you look at this, so taxes and income generation of government are very much important. But when you have a country with this rigid land law, so those who are engaged in the business related to land activities, it is very difficult to, tax over their income, because in order to generate money, a surplus, or for reinvestment, lot of procedures and time consuming procedures need to be followed by the business community. So I think these speeches must be documented and must come out as papers, and case studies are very much important. So if the Department of Estate Management and Valuation can study the views of entrepreneurs who are now engaged in business in the field of land and related areas, and if they can present these ideas to the government, then I would say there is a future for us. Otherwise, we are now in a total bottleneck, in a fully liberal situation, but land law is fully blocked and very rigid, and the labor law also same. So entrepreneurs are suffering, and without having a friendly atmosphere in business, so this is the responsibility of policymakers, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your contribution. So we move on to Mr. Mudadenia, who is also with us in the panel. And the question to you is, as your company has taken a large play in Sri Lanka's real estate development market with Cinnamon Life and the numerous other properties across Sri Lanka in tourism, events, and so on and so forth. So I would like to understand from you, for the benefit of our audience, some of the key indicators you considered when contemplating the investment, and looking back, I'm pretty sure most of those are in the right place, but there may be some areas that you would want some changes. And questions from a tourism angle, and you mentioned Sri Lanka's India strategy. Have our policies changed enough to accommodate this need to bring in and tap into that neighborhood of 1 billion population into Sri Lanka? What kind of changes are required? Would like to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's, again, a timely exercise by the University of Jayewardenepura and organizing something like this. And it's also important that in Sri Lanka, actually, we have seen not much of a connection between academics and the practitioners. So there's a big gap between the two, because practitioners don't have time to go into research to understand why it's happening, and rather than just understanding what is happening. But if this link is actually established through these workshops and these kind of programs, as actually indicated earlier, it will be really useful, especially to academics to maybe research on their theses and PhD studies, some of the business problems that we are facing, and a comparative study with some of the other countries, which can actually eventually help to have enabling policies which the business community can actually thrive on. So all what we need is enabling environment to do it, and all the points that were mentioned before in terms of time that is taken for approval, even if you're going to do a overall environment impact analysis, EIA studies or IE studies, it takes long time. So no project in Sri Lanka can actually, from the time of initial concept until time that you execute, you need to keep about a year and a half, maybe 2 years for approvals, depending on the locations, to get it right. And sometimes this can be a little frustrating from investors' perspective, because by the time you plan your per square foot development cost, by the time you actually mobilize and start, it will be actually 20-30%, and that will have a feasibility issue and cost factors, etc. So doing business index that Sri Lanka needs to improve a lot. And we know that there's BOI, one-stop shops and all those things available. But investor confidence will come in, especially Sri Lankan investors also, if these things can be streamlined and more efficiency can be brought in to the system, especially where the projects are concerned, so that you can start and operate very, very smoothly. So looking at the, yes, we have engaged in some of the biggest investments in Sri Lanka. So the reason is that we have a lot of confidence, especially ending of the war. And we believe that the Sri Lanka market has a lot of potential to grow. If you look at it, 180,000 people get married every year. And their aspiration is that every person actually wants to have 10 perch land and then and build a house. You know that in Sri Lanka is a small nation, 65,000 square kilometers. Out of that, 50% or 40% is actually not really allowed to build any kind of construction. The balance are out of Colombo or away from the urban areas. So the Colombo area, which has a demand, has a very scarcity of land, and still only 1% actually lives in apartments and condos. Whereas compared to Thailand, Malaysia, it's about 30–40% lives in that. So there's a potential to grow. And there's, I think the hope is there, and that's the only way actually people can really urban living and new way of living. So looking at that, we are heavily involved in tourism, large number of rooms in the country, and then of course 800 rooms coming up end of next year. Cinema Life project, 4.5 million square feet, close to $1 billion investment, the largest investment in Sri Lanka so far in that context. We actually depend a lot in terms of tourism. So it's very important that the government has robust strategies, policies, and also the National Tourism Organization actually implement continuous planning process and continuous destination marketing demand creation programs. So I think currently a lot of work has been done by the tourism board, and they also have given opportunities to the private sector to sit on those boards and drive some of these things. The one of the things actually to look at the institutional capacity in some of these organizations to execute the type of program that is required by the destination. So compared, if you look at Malaysia Tourism Board, Thai Tourism Board, and Singapore Tourism Boards, etc., they have a lot of policies and know-how, etc. But within the Sri Lankan context, not only this government institution, but many, they need to do something to bring certain efficiencies, and we see the leadership is actually looking at it and going to these places, sitting down, and even actually having meetings. And so I think we need a drive there to create that efficiency. So if you ask me whether Sri Lanka has done enough to create that destination demand, I think we can do much more. The reason is that, Sri Lanka is, if you look at it in terms of the man-made attractions and actually natural attractions, are one of the leading destinations. We only get 2.3 million arrivals. If you look at Thailand, it's close to 28 million, Malaysia, 30 million. India is not the best example of tourism from overseas. And the highest country in the world, France, is about 65 million tourists. So 2.3 million is not enough. And also we need to look at what we call purpose-driven tourism. It is not the numbers that we are looking at it. More tourists mean there's a cost to the government, cost to the country. And the cost of living can go up if you don't get the right type of tourists. We don't need people with $10 and actually coming and living on the infrastructure that we created, creating more cost and sustainable issues. So we need actually the right type of people. For that, we need a right kind of segmentation, right kind of marketing, and also important that the development policies that we are going into the country. And today we know that, if you start developing a hotel in some place, minimum approval time is 2 years and 2.5 years. That's adding into what was actually mentioned in Premalal as well in terms of funding. Not only that, and the process is actually quite steep, and then actually be abandoned. I mean, we already abandoned 2 projects, which is outside as a result of not exactly this, but time taken is too much and a lot of issues, etc. So we need to look at these when you're building the hotels, where we allowed to build hotels and what type of hotels. Because mushrooming of a lot of low-end accommodation, etc., might really bring down the pricing of the destination and may not be the right direction. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any of those, but we should importantly zone it. And then in the certain zones, we allow the destination marketing, or at least the upmarket tourists to come in, the high value added to tourism. The other areas, of course, you can have the mix. But currently 60% of our hotel capacity, accommodation capacity is below 3-star. And the type of tourists are coming in actually are sometimes not even $5 or $10. I'm not talking about now, but before COVID. So we need to relook at it. We need to look at how we actually drive the purpose-driven tourism into the country. And then how do we add the value addition into this, especially on the city tourism. There are a lot of opportunities whereas we can add value added to tourism into the city tourism, shopping tourism, conference, MICE, the business tourism. These are things that actually we should actively involve, and also very important that the link between the national carrier that we have to do in terms of working in. And not to forget that these some of the changes that are happening in the country, port city, etc., will add a lot of value to overall infrastructure of tourism. It has actually creation of many attractions there. The other thing is from a development perspective, a lot of people are putting money, etc., in hotels, etc. Currently, I think a lot of people will think twice before building a hotel because of the low yield, unlike Maldives and other places. But there are other areas which we need to invest, especially on the tourism attractions area and experiences area, where we need a certain amount of invest to go in, and there will be money once the tourists actually start coming in, because we need theaters, we need entertainment, we need various type of tourist attractions that can add into where people can come and enjoy. Those things need investment. It doesn't need a huge amount of investment like a big hotel, but we need that. So once we develop that, that also will actually bring a certain amount of competitiveness to the industry. And I also actually fully endorse this purpose of land in terms of valuation. Now, if you look at Colombo, we are actually struggling. Colombo does not have a proper convention hall. And DMICH is very old. And it is good enough, but you can't have, when the room numbers have gone up, you're talking about 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people to be accommodated on a conference, on a concert, on a theater. We don't have one in Sri Lanka. So Indian government recently identified this, and they actually create a lot of tax benefits for the people who are bringing entertainment to the country, like, theater, musicals, etc. And in Sri Lanka, we have 51% added taxes. We have withholding tax, we have municipality tax, we have VAT, and we have another 3% on credit cards, and all these added is about 51% doesn't make commercially viable. So along with this, you need to create convention halls. Now, we know the current valuation, nobody will put a convention hall in Colombo, etc., because it has to be a single story one. It can't be actually multi-story. Only type of investment that you can actually can gain and recover is only when you go multiple stories, so that you can recover by selling those apartments. But we need things slightly different. I was told there's a convention hall coming in the port city, but we need those things into in Colombo, where we can bring large numbers once the COVID situation is actually completely solved, and moving into the MICE tourism. Otherwise, we don't have a location for such establishment or such a place, and even the place that we have is actually not really up to standard in terms of safety standards, etc. So these are some of the points that I think if you want to be in tourism, etc., we need to make sure that city tourism takes off, because every country which the tourism is doing well, their city tourism has done well. Then the spillover go to the other areas. But Sri Lanka, city tourism is where the largest amount of rooms, but we have the least amount of tourists. So we need to reverse this position by bringing a little more infrastructure into it, then having more policies that are actually conducive for tourism, and to create more events and activities around the city, so that the regional tourism can take off and the numbers can come in, especially from India. That's the largest market. Just next door, we just actually have airline connections, 2 hours, 3 hours, people can bring large numbers, and that's where the money is. And we need to really focus on India strategy in Sri Lanka. Tourism is crucial and going to be very critical for the success of tourism in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Mudania. So you brought up the need for more investment in tourism infrastructure, in real estate assets. So my next question is Mr. Sri Jayewardenepura. Again, both in your capacity as the chairman of People's Bank and as a finance professional in your own right, I want to touch on a couple of matters. The first one is on investment. And when we look at investment, we also talk about risk of those investments. If you look at the risk profile, you did mention that in some cases you're finding some assets are a little stressed. Is there appetite for investment by the banking sector in real estate, not necessarily hotels, but even residential and other related infrastructure? The first question. Secondly, Sri Lanka recently established a real estate investment trust or REIT. And through REIT, most regional markets have been able to mobilize large amounts of money for investment. And that could really push our real estate market into a better place. What is your view on these two angles? One, on the risk of assets, the willingness of the banking sector to invest in it. Secondly, the availability of possibly a large pool of funds through the REIT and how that could change the real estate landscape in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Mr. Raj.
Yeah, thanks. The two matters about the risk profile or the risk appetite, what the bankers generally have these days. I must tell you, now because of the low interest rate regime, a lot of people are going for, the condos, because rather than having their excess funds in a bank account for, say, let us say 5-6%, it's better for them to invest in condos, where you will have at least more than certainly 10-15% growth every year. So therefore, even People's Bank, we get quite number of customers. A, there are people who are looking for condos. B, people or other companies, corporates who are developing condos. I think my friend Premalal spot on one of the important things. Sometimes bankers, they look at all the risk profile in terms of many things, but they may sometimes do not really look at the governance structure or the people who are behind you. Of course, the bankers, the number one paramount important thing is for them to look at KYC, know your customer. When it comes for certain things, from my own experience from People's Bank, I have seen that there are certain areas we have not really looked into the governance. Sometimes, you go with the kind of a sentiments because of the fact that they have been developing so many condos, but end of the day, because of the certain mismanagement or maybe due to stress situation, people tend to invest in some other projects rather than investing in the project where they are supposed to invest. Another thing is, when it comes for risk profile, bankers need to change their role now, because typical banker, what happens is, okay, the customer comes to you, agree, okay, you look at your risk profile, and then you go through the rigorous risk assessment process and you approve the loan, and then you disperse the loan, and you forget about that. As long as the customer pays their monthly installment, including the interest, banker is happy. But now, even at People's Bank, now we have changed that role, because now we need to be with the customer. That's very important. Otherwise, what happens is, when customer is in a stress situation, or when they are in amber, before getting to the red, or sometime when they are in red, only banker will go behind them and see, look here, where's my money? Instead, if a banker can change their role to be with the customer throughout, at least once a month, go and visit them and see what's happening. And I think then you can change the risk profile. That's very important. Looking at from REIT, I think that's absolutely important aspect. Even when I was a commission member at the SCC, Securities Exchange Commission, we started. There were 10 projects. One is about developing, promoting this REIT as well, because REIT will certainly give a huge kind of boost and the development in the real estate sector in this country. Of course, there are certain factors that the government will have to look at. I'm sure that government, through this budget, they may come out with certain tax concessions and things like that for these real estate development companies, where I'm sure that they can seriously look at REITs, and the people will be able to invest in REITs when time to come. That's a welcoming the initiative done by SCC. So therefore, looking forward, having all these concessions in near future, I'm sure that the people, because of the, again coming back to this, because of this single interest rate or the very low interest rate regime, people would like to go for other alternative investments like condos, where People's Bank also has already come out with certain different offerings or different loan the schemes, especially focusing professionals, academics, and other people. Even at the moment, we have. I'm sure what the developers like Access or the Prime, what they should do is, I think, better to partner with bankers, and then promote those your products to customers who would like to be with those bankers and get the best deal done. So that's how we should look at this moment.
Thank you, Mr. Rajapak, sir. A couple of our panelists brought up this question on valuation. So I would like to direct this next question to Mr. Senaratna. Two questions specifically. The first one is what the panelists brought up, the value in use. You mentioned earlier in your submission that you look at the present value of future earnings based on past data. So if you look at that definition alone in today's context, it becomes very difficult for a developer to get a proper valuation, because on the one side, apologies, the future value is derived through everything. Sometimes it's beyond rentals. It might be a capital gain. At the same time, there's past that doesn't really exist in reliable form. So my first question to you is, why is it that, especially from a government perspective, that properties are not valued for use? And secondly, it's on the availability of information. So if you just tackle the first question on the value of in use.
Thank you, Leon. Now, I think before answering your question, I think I have to make some clarifications about the four presenters, or four or five presenters. They made their presentation before me. In fact, Mr. Premanal mentioned about development properties or projects, project developments, and rating of developers scenario. And of course, as a valuer, having so many years of experience in the field, as Mr. Premalal and all of us know, there were so many developers in this country. And what happened was, there are three stages in developing lands: pre-development, selling stage, and post-development. Before pre-development, of course, they make a lot of say that pipe-borne water is there, electricity is there, then the infrastructure facilities are there, everything is there, and that's the strategy they make to put the property into market. Then once they sold all the lots developed by them, then who is to look after the maintenance of the roads and other things? Whether the local authority is responsible or any other person is responsible. Because I have visited so many projects like that to see that when the lands are not developed, purchased and just lying there idling, then the roads are not maintained, overgrown with spread jungle, and of course nobody can read them. Sometimes most of them might have mortgage to the banks also and taken loans. That's one thing. And there should be some system. And as you said, the good companies, I don't know the strategy what they make to maintain the facilities they provided at the developing stage, and to maintain them and after selling the lots, and what sort of strategy you are making, I do not know. And the secondly, Mr. Christopher Joshua mentioned about the parking lands, valuation of parking lands. It's a problem like this. I think it's better for me to show him a property of himself. The access tower. Behind that, there's land that is used for parking. Don't know whether, I can't remember whether there's any inside parking within the building. And when the planning authorities are giving permission, I don't know whether they have given permission to construct the multi-storied building, assuming that the parking will be provided on ground. If it's so, of course, I don't think we may be able to put a separate value for that parking area, because it won't be, although you can utilize it for high-rise parking building, but if it is a part of the planning permission already given for the main building, I don't think as a valuer, we can do the valuation of the same property. And thirdly, Mr. Mudadeniya Dilip, he mentioned about this delay in approval. Of course, 200% I agree with that. 200% I agree with that. Because, there are so many barriers to get the approval. For an example, if I say filling of a paddy land, approval for filling of a paddy land, just to get permission to fill a paddy land, you have to, I think, get approval from 16 institutions in this country. And for an ordinary person, I don't know. And also how much of time they take to do that. And also the when you look at the valuation point of view, if a person is mortgaging a land, also it's developed with a building and developed land. And if it is for mortgage, if we are asked to valuation for mortgage purpose, we look at the name of the land. If it is say Delgahayata Kumburo, Ambagahayata Kumburo like that, we generally ask for the permission from Agrarian Commission General for the filling permission under Section 29 of the Agrarian Development Act. Those things, of course, they are at planning permission with the land approval of the land. And a lot of things, legal things are there. From that, I can move to Professor Sampath Tamurtunga's matter. He said the big barricade is the land law in this country. I totally agree with that. Because I was dealing mostly with the land acquisitions under Land Acquisition Act number 9 of 1950. And there were so many drawbacks, because we have to go with the far with the systems in other developed countries. For instance, if we say old building is acquired, we have to say take the depreciated value and pay compensation. But that poor person may not be able to reconstruct his house somewhere else with the money he is getting. So it's one simple example. And also I can give another example. If a land is acquired for a road widening purpose, a strip of land, our law says you value it as a separate entity, but we can't do that, because if we value it as a separate entity, 10 feet wide strip of land, although it is located in Columbus City, nobody will buy it for any development, because development is not given. So to overcome those difficulties, of course, we made some suggestions. When I was in office, of course, I made some suggestions, and we passed the regulation 2008 to overcome certain difficulties in Land Acquisition Act. And likewise, there are so many legislations in this country where you have to look into and make suitable amendments for the topic we are talking today, the real estate talk, develop into developed. Unless you come out of all those barricades in our existing law, it's very difficult. And to tell you, actually, another thing is, when we take the Rent Act, then the Rent Act also has, rent law has a very big effect, the impact on the valuation. When we take for development scenario, we have to acquire private lands, we have to pay compensation. Then, of course, we have to value the land. If a property is occupied by a tenant, what will happen? The market value is generally based on the assessed rent under the Rent Act. It's a very, very minimum amount if compared to the normal open market rental value. So those are, of course, now, of course, the Rent Act, I don't have enough time to explain to you, of course. Now it has come to dying stage. Of course, no validity of some of the provisions in the Rent Act by now. So I don't want to explain them. Now to answer Diane. You said, you asked me, can't we value taking the use of the land into account? But our valuation scenario really, we go on the open market value. When we take the open market value, we have to take into consideration a lot of things, especially of the planning permission. And if we take the Colombo city, there are so many zones made by the UDA: industrial zone, residential zone, high residential road, port development area, and agricultural. Likewise, so many zones, industrial, likewise, so many zones. If a property is situated within such a zone, of course, we can't deviate from them, and we have to value taking the zone into consideration, because you can't have a, for instance, if we say that industrial area, if you want to have a commercial center, they will not allow you to do so. Therefore, we can't go that. We take use into account under that scenario. Otherwise, of course, we generally go on the market value. And what the really required is the government or the authority who are giving that land must have some strategy or some solution for that. And of course, as policy-making institutions have the power to do so. So is that sufficient, Diane?
Thank you, Mr. Seraratna. Thank you very much. Right. So we now move into the last 15-20 minutes of our session. So we have quite a few participants and delegates with us, and you are encouraged to use the chat window to submit your questions, and I can submit them to the panel. But until I get some of these questions, I would like to ask a kind of open-ended question from Mr. Premanand, Joshua, or Mr. Seraratna here. One thing that determines the real estate market is also the use of the real estate property itself. And in the last 6 months or so, we've been seeing global and also in Sri Lanka, almost like a movement of people looking to work from home. Now, while in the first few weeks and months, it seemed like a accommodative thing to do, when your office comes home, there is also a change in the demographic for those who are at home on the one hand, and at the same time, the use of layout in a home, the suitable place and things like that. So in the real estate development that is taking place today, are these apartments, housing complexes, houses, on the one hand, ready for work from home? And the second point is, will this kind of movement of people, the requirement not to be in a city, have a defining impact on the real estate value? So this open question, anyone in the panel, please may ask.
If you want me to give a comment on that one. Yes.
Yes, Mr.
Yes. Basically, yes, we are in unprecedented times with this COVID-19, and which is the first time for all of us. And the challenge, especially where we are in, we are also in office rental and lease, where we have about almost 400,000 square feet leased out office space here. So there has been this tendency of work from home because of the conditions, because people are scared to travel, and of course, because of some authorities requesting also to comply and try to work from home as much as possible. So yes, right now, of course, no such requirement was there previously, and that consideration is not there in whatever is existing. But if you take the new developments and condominiums into consideration, of course, broadband facilities or fiber facilities or any data enabling facilities are available. So it's a matter of, plugging in and using them. And of course, as you know, our telecom network is so intense, and, our mobile coverage, we are in that form also building infrastructure to the mobile operators. So the countrywide giving the required bandwidths for operating is almost available. I mean, other than a few pockets, it's available. So people working from home could work, provided, of course, as you said, the home environment is conducive. Now there is a challenge here. Now we did a survey just to understand this, the impact of this. We did a survey of, at certain times, I think every company was encouraging people to work from home, including our own business, where we employ almost 7,000 people. And when we did a survey, whether we still like to continue, when of course times in certain stages we requested them to come back to work. And the survey result was surprising for us. Most of the ladies said they want to come to work. They don't want to work from home. So when we, of course, HR did an audit on them and asked why it is, because they say, if I'm at home, they get me to do everything else. Look after the baby, make the cup of tea, cook and all that. I'd rather come to the air-conditioned office and work here. So maybe part of our culture and part of our own environment still encourage people to come to work and work from a conducive office environment. We host some of the, of course, blue chip companies and diversified companies within our buildings, and getting a feedback from them also, they felt that yes, they also encourage work from home, but the most of their staff, the majority, still like to come to office if they have the facility and if they have if they're permitted to do so. So that is a little encouraging from the real estate development perspective, and that is, I think, culturally we have been brought up in an environment that home is home and office is office. Home office is something new, and of course, if the pandemic persists, of course, then people will have to think otherwise, and those things will come into play. But for the moment, encouragement is there to work from home, but people, as an option, still prefer to come to office. It seems that way. And also, I want to just make a remark on Mr. Senaratna's explanation about the car parking. To say that access towers, of course, are not, the planning is not dependent on that parking. We are a building with parking ratio of 4 times more than the requirement. So we are well above. We are 400 times more than the requirement. So it's not for our building. The sad thing is that that land is by court determined that it is for a car park, but the valuation is the normal valuation. That is the craziness which I can't understand. And also, if Mr. Senaratna can give an example of a land which is adjacent to a commercial property, which is earmarked for car parking and has a different value, then we can understand this a little better, I think, based on the value for that purpose.
Mr. Senaratna, would you like to respond to that?
Hello.
Mr. Senaratna, would you like to respond to that?
In fact, that's what I say, because planning is very important, because if a land like that is given for us, if it is for car parking, as allocated for car parking, of course, we can do the valuation based on the income they generate. No problem there. We can go on the normal land value and or even higher land value, taking into consideration the parking. That's one of the business now. Right, like condominium, if they are going to develop that with a condominium property, what we take into consideration, they are going to develop that with a condominium property. Likewise, if they are using it for car parking, if the planning authority or the municipal council or urban council, this local authority allows them to develop that land with car parking, of course, you can go on the normal land value. You don't put a lower value for that.
No, I just want to, I think there's a confusion with the question. The question is, this is a UDA land, it's a state land where the state has specified, the law of the state has specified that only a car park can be built here. But the government valuation on this land is the normal commercial value. That is the question. So already the purpose is defined by law, and UDA also knows it's only a car park being built, but the value is the commercial value. That is the problem.
Yeah, but the thing is this, Mr. Joshua. Now, the requesting authority, because I am not out of the department, not that I am talking anything about the department, but normal practice I have to explain to you. Normal practice is when they send the request to the valuation department, they say the market value of that particular land. They don't give that, specify that this will be going to use for that particular purpose. If they say they are going to use it for that purpose only, then of course we can consider it. Otherwise, we are unaware. We generally go on the normal comparison basis. Okay.
Thank you very much. That's more clarity there.
Thank
you, Mr. Ratman. So I would like to go back to that question asked whether Mr. Prema has any views on the work from home and the development angle of that. Mr. Prema? Go ahead, Mr. Prema. We are listening. You are on mute, I believe.
Can you hear me now?
Now we
Hello?
can. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr.
There are some industries, some professions that you can work from home. For example, software industry, software company, 100% of course, yes, they can work from home. So we are a real estate construction projects and all that, our 90% is active basis. Of course, our legal team can be at home, maybe our little bit of accountancy, they can be at home. But but the real thing happening is at the site. So I cannot understand how can you work from a site to the site. So it's out. I mean, to some supportive services can work for a particular period of time, but real things that are happening at the construction site, so that cannot, that's not really practical. It has to be site and the people with all this thing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Premla. So after quite a bit of time, that comes then this panel discussion. So on my behalf, I thank Dr. Kalutantri and the team for inviting me and the panelists. So over to you, Doctor, for the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Dan, and the members of the panel. So we have come to the conclusion of our event. Thank you for all for being with us for last 4 days. So here we will mark the end of ICREMV 2020. I would like to thank all our collaborative partners of the ICREMV, includes Government Valuation Department, Urban Development Authority, Colombo Municipal Council, Institute of Valuers of Sri Lanka, RICS Sri Lanka, Leadership Forum, and University of Sri Jayewardenepura, EME Crew, and EME RCB Club. Also, to academic partners, Construction Project Management Program of School of Housing, Building and Planning, Universiti Sains, Malaysia, and Faculty of Humanities and Environmental Studies of Kyushu University. Also, I would like to thank our keynote speaker of the conference, Professor Andrew Bao, Professor of Practice, University of Oxford, and all 24 academic and professional speakers who made ICREMV 2020 a success. So with that, with these concluding remarks, I will conclude the session and see you again in 2020. Until then, goodbye. Stay safe.